And your New Testament reading will be from the Old Testament book of Joshua, chapter 3. Hear now the word of the Lord. Early in the morning, Joshua rose and set out from Shittim with all the Israelites and came to the Jordan. They camped there before crossing over. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, "When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priests, then you shall set out from your place. Follow it, so that you may know the way you should go. For you have not passed this way before. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, a distance of about 2,000 cubits." That's about half a mile. "Do not come any nearer to it." Then Joshua said to the people, "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." To the priests, Joshua said, "Take up the ark of the covenant and pass on in front of the people." So they took the ark of the covenant and went in front of the people. The Lord said to Joshua, "This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so that they may know that I will be with you as I was with Moses. You are the one who shall command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant. When you come to the edge of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan." Joshua then said to the Israelites, "Draw near and hear the words of the Lord your God." Joshua said, "By this you shall know that among you is the living God, who without fail will drive out from before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. The ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is going to pass before you into the Jordan. So now, select 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. When the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, rest in the waters of the Jordan of the Jordan, flowing up above, shall be cut off, and they shall stand in a single heap. When the people set out from their tents to cross over the Jordan, the priests bearing the ark of the covenant were in front of the people. Now, Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. So when those who bore the ark had come to the Jordan, the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped in the edge of the water. The waters flowing above stood still, rising in a single heap, far off at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, while those flowing towards the Sea of Arabah, the Dead Sea, were wholly cut off. Then the people crossed over opposite Jericho. While all Israel was crossing over on dry ground, the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan until the entire nation had finished crossing over Jordan. The word of the Lord. So there are two really incredible miracle stories happening at the edge of the water that we are discussing today. The first one, the Old Testament reading, I've already preached on. That's the story of the Gerasene demoniac, the demon-possessed man in the region of the Gerasenes. I'm sure you all remember it, but I forgot it. So we'll review a little bit. It was a part of our Mark series. We read the parallel of that passage out of Mark, so I thought I'd give you the Luke version of it this time. And I was talking to you about how strange it is, how unusual that Jesus, when a man who he had healed of demons wanted to follow him, Jesus said, "No, don't follow me. Stay here. See, at that time in the history of the church, we were talking about this novel idea called evangelism. We had this understanding that Mark was a gospel written to non-Christians, and that non-Christians really had a better opportunity to understand the Gospel of Mark than some of the rest of us. And if we would read Mark in community with non-Christians, we'd get more out of it. And so we were dealing consistently with the subject of engaging with non-Christians and talking to them and appreciating their insights. And yet, we were asking people to follow us as we followed Jesus, and Jesus was doing this really strange thing, saying, "No, you good?" Do you remember that? Okay, can I bring you back to that time in the history of the church? You remember when we were doing that? Jesus saw a step for the demon-possessed man that the demon-possessed man didn't see, and that I think for many of us, we have a hard time seeing. Jesus didn't see this formerly demon-possessed man from the Roman region of the Gerasenes as a victim. He didn't see this person as a patient, as someone wounded, as damaged goods that need just to be kind of taken care of and loosely held together. Jesus didn't suppose that he would be helping this man by allowing him to stay around and follow him and be safe. Be reminded of his healing and his healer every day. Be reminded of what he used to be, and to know that if ever the demons came back, his Savior was always in arm's reach. That was appealing, but it wasn't what this man needed. Instead, Jesus didn't give him what he wanted, but gave him what he needed. He said, "You're not a victim. You're not damaged goods. What you are is a preacher. What you are is a minister of my gospel." And the man went back proclaiming. That's the word that's used in Scripture. He was proclaiming, diakonoi. He was preaching the good news about God and how much Jesus had done for him, because he was not allowed to stay in that comfortable position, in that place of perpetual healing. Sometimes churches don't follow that example of Jesus. Sometimes we encourage people to stay always as children, and we keep the meat away and keep you on milk because we want dependency. We want you to be dependent not only on Jesus, but on the organized religious system, and that's not the model. The goal of evangelism is not to make everyone into Christian spectators. The goal of evangelism is to make everyone into Christian participants. I would even go further. I would say to make everyone into Christian ministers. That's a core belief I have. I hope I've been explicit about it before. Perhaps I haven't been explicit enough, often enough, but I believe that everyone is called to ministry. Everyone is called to the service of the cross, to be a minister of the Lord Jesus Christ. Yes, even you. Not everyone is called to be a pastor, that is, a minister of word and sacrament. We had a good example of that today with our installation of officers. Some of us are called to ordered ministry. Not all of us are called to be elders, ruling elders that serve on session. Or some of us are called to that for a while and then called to not do that anymore. But no one is called to nothing. No one is called to nothing. And so the fact that I have a specialty, that I'm a minister of word and sacrament, that I stand at table and preside over the sacraments, doesn't take away from the fact that you have a specialty. You're each called to your own ministries. God created you to do something for him. Or lots of things. And so if you think you were created for one thing, hey, I've got to take care of this special needs child and get them to a place where they can stand on their own and stand on their own 2 feet, but they're an adult now and they've moved out of the house. That's great. That could be what God called you to do for that season of your life. But if you're still alive, there's something else. God has something else for you after that. And that's not only my belief, that everyone is called to ministry, that everyone is called to do something for God. It's not only a biblical belief. If you read the Bible, you will not find a place where Jesus makes distinctions between the clergy and the congregation. There's just no understanding of that in the New Testament. It's also a very, very core, very central Presbyterian belief. It's something that we've built our church around. If you think that only a few special people are supposed to preach and evangelize and minister, there's a name for that. It's called clericalism. And clericalism is the opposite of Presbyterianism. Clericalism is the opposite of Presbyterianism. The word Presbyterian actually comes from a Greek word, Presbyterian. I know, it was a real stretch in transliteration on that one. Presbyterian, the Greek word, literally means elder. And it's synonymous with another Greek word, episkopoi, Episcopalian, which literally means overseer and is usually translated bishop. So if you are a Presbyterian, you're an elder, you're an episkopoi, you're a bishop. By the transitive property, you are a part of the bishop church. Each and every one of you are bishops. What do you want to be the bishop of? Presbyterians believe that we're all called to ministry. Some of us ordered ministry, some of us less ordered, but it's all ministry. It's all equally valuable. It's all equally important. And it's all equally governed by God. I remember when I was young, I wanted to be a cartoonist. I would make little cartoons on bookmarks. And then I got a little older and I wanted to be a comedian. And then I realized that comedians don't actually get to just tell jokes they want to tell. They got to practice jokes and tell the same ones over and over. And that didn't sound any fun to me. And so then I wanted to be a tech guy. And eventually I just wanted to be anything I could to not be a preacher, like my father. Because I'd seen him struggling with his boss, the senior pastor, and I'd seen the dysfunction present inside church systems. I'd seen how the sausage gets made. And I'd been with him. And I'd walked into those hospital rooms and those motel rooms, and to the funerals of the people that he tried to reach but didn't quite, who overdosed or killed themselves. And I wanted to do anything but that. And so when God called me into ministry, when he spoke to me, I started a blog. That's a journal on the internet. And I called that blog Fear of Whales. Fear of Whales is a Jonah reference. Day by day and week by week in that blog, I chronicled my struggle and my slow obedience to that call. I didn't want to do it, but I'm afraid of whales. And I know that when God calls you into ministry, it's not optional. And everyone is called into ministry. And so I can appreciate that when I say that, it can have the tendency to bring about a certain amount of anxiety in you. It can have the tendency to feel like pressure. I appreciate it because I directly relate to it. I felt it. For 14 years, Between the day God first called me to follow him on this path and the day that I kneeled on this chancel and you put a stole on my shoulders, I felt it. And so in this sermon, in this message, I hope that I can give some reassurance, some pastoral, calming, soothing encouragement for that anxiety which is present when we engage this truth that we're all called to ministry. I should mention, by the way, I'm kind of reviewing things. I'm reviewing this reading from Mark and the time we went through that, but that's also why I prefer to wear a suit when I preach from the pulpit. I'm not sure I've articulated that before from the pulpit. Not that there's anything wrong with robes, but when John Calvin first put on a robe to preach in, that was not to represent that he was someone special and different that was called to ministry. It was the opposite of that. Robes at the time were worn by lawyers, and so he was demonstrating that he was just a common, everyday, working-class guy like us. And so I wear interview clothes. I've thought about wearing like tech guy stuff, right? Like a polo shirt and a Bluetooth ear set, but I didn't think you'd like that. So I'm dressed up to go to work, because that's what I'm doing. I'm going to work. I'm a working person. And that represents, that's one of the ways in which I resist clericalism and try to demonstrate to you in physical ways my belief and the importance of the priesthood of all believers, that you are all holy priests. You're all people that are called to serve God. And that brings us to Joshua, where I hope we can find some reassurance. It's reassuring to me. This is a passage that I turn back to when I feel like it's too much, and I hope it can be for you too. In the story, God is speaking to Joshua, and God speaks to each of you. If you're willing to listen, He's speaking. And God has called Joshua, and He's calling each and every one of you, and He is giving Joshua specific instructions because He has made Joshua to be in charge of the nation of Israel, which is currently, as we enter the story, on the wrong side of the Jordan River. And they do not have any boats. And what's more, when they get to the other side, on the other side, there is an impregnable fortress named Jericho, and it is filled with their enemies, and they have that to deal with. Have you ever woken up in the morning, finished your morning prayers, because I know you all do that first, and then looked at your to-do list and thought, how am I going to get it all done? Is that a relatable concept? Just me? I know we're Presbyterians. You can at least groan at me. Joshua's to-do list looked like this: Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, Jebusites. And all of that happens, Joshua, after you get everyone across the river. Men, women, children, old, infirm. And by the way, many of them don't want to go across. They like it on this side of the river. That's where they're going to dwell, the 1.5 tribes. And they're all having doubts about you, Joshua, as their leader. They're not sure they want you to be in charge. They liked Moses, but Moses is dead. Who are you to them? It's overwhelming. It's too much. It's the kind of situation that makes a person say to God, "No, I can't, Lord. Here am I, send somebody else. Let me be a spectator. Let me sit here on dry ground where it's safe." But God didn't ask Joshua to accomplish this all by himself. God was marching with the people. He was right there. He was in the ark. And God asked Joshua to do the possible. That's the takeaway. That God always asks us to do the possible so we can do the impossible. See, God didn't leave Joshua to accomplish the impossible all by himself. But God also didn't do the impossible for Joshua. He didn't relinquish Joshua from his responsibility. He told Joshua to pick 12 people, 12 disciples, people who would be willing to take the first step. Just take step one. You can't cross the Jordan? Okay. What can you do? How far can you go? Can you dip your toe in? Okay. Then do that. Do that much. Do as much as you can. And God does the rest. After this story, they cross over into Jericho. Do you know that story? Have you seen the VeggieTales? Can you win a battle against an enemy with fortifications the likes of which the ancient world has never seen? No? What can you do? You can blow a trumpet? Okay, do that. Over and over and over again, God says, I will do the impossible, but you have to help. I won't do it for you while you watch. If you do the part of this that is possible, I will do the part that isn't. And so what about you? What then has this to say about you and me? What's it got to do with the price of rice in China? Goes back to these 5 steps, doesn't it? Everything does. Again, this diagram is just a diagram, but the path of discipleship is not something we invented. It's been here. And it all connects back. If you look at everything there is to do, it's overwhelming. It's good to know there's a plan, but it's too much and I can't do all of that. So don't look at everything to do. But get your feet wet. Step into the Jordan. Do one small act of obedience. Begin somewhere. I was talking to someone, and I'll keep it confidential, but I was talking about step 1. And they were saying to me, I don't know anyone who's a Christian, and I know that I'm supposed to. I know that it would be good if I could make new friends, but I'm not ready for that yet. I'm dealing with other things in my life, and so I don't know how to pray for two non-Christians that are not in my family, that are in my network. And so I advised that person, okay, will you pray that God would point out some non-Christians? Will you, if you can't take step 1, will you take step 1/2? If you can't put your whole foot in the water, will you put your toe in? Will you begin somewhere and just see, just taste and see that the Lord is good? Just see if God will not be 1,000 times more faithful to you than you are faithful to Him. This applies in every area of your life. This applies certainly about prayer. It applies about taking the next step on this 5-step cycle. If you're familiar with the prayer and you're already comfortable with that, but you're not sure about the talking to people, groan first, right? And God will make that way possible. But it's also true in everything else you're dealing with. If you're depressed, I have struggled with depression. Many of the people I love have struggled with depression. It's not necessarily possible for you to have a good day when you're depressed. Can you have a day? Can you get out of bed and maybe you don't shower, but you can brush your teeth? And then see what God does with that step. But it's much, much easier to steer a sinking ship. To steer a moving ship. It's not possible to steer a sinking ship, but it's easier to steer a sailing ship. And so, if you can get the ship in motion, even just a small amount, then God can use you. And God, when He called you, He qualified you. When God selected you for the work that He selected you to do, He already took into account your stupidity. He already took into account your stubbornness, your limitedness, the mistakes that you're going to make. He knows about all those things. Those aren't surprises to Him. He did it anyway. God knows what God is doing. And it's in that spirit, that humble spirit, that spirit of humility and obedience, slow obedience, fear of whales, and not as much the spirit of excitement that I hope you'll carry with you as we sing the hymn of response. Here I am, Lord. Part of the reason I wanted to share with you this story from Joshua is to give more context to the benediction I've been praying over you these past few weeks. The reason why God had to say to Joshua over and over again, in fact, the same thing I say to you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Amen.